We have a common interest in better global governance because there are problems that exist that can only be solved through cooperation. It's what my former boss, Kofi Annan, called problems without passports. That is, they're problems that don't have a national basis and national authority and national jurisdiction attached to them, so they can be solved nationally. The most striking, clear example is, of course, climate change. Climate change cannot be solved unless the United States and China and probably India make a strong commitment to do so. The Europeans are somewhat on track to adjusting towards a world in which we must reduce the heating up of the planet. And a number of other small countries don't really count because they don't have enough effect. But the US, China, and India have to change and get on board and lead in order for them to be for a solution. And no one of them can do it alone. Even if we had a radical transformation of US politics with a totally green president coming on board, not enough unless China and India also do. And if China suddenly became green or India became green, not enough unless the United States also changed. So we need those three, and especially the US and China, but also India, to commit in order to have a reasonable effort that will make this planet livable for our grandchildren. Otherwise, they're going to be facing all sorts of, not certain, but quite likely harms that will affect everything from the flow of diseases across borders through to the availability of food, and at the same time, the global health that will be affected by rising levels of pollutants in the atmosphere. And all of that together, together with potential melting of Antarctica, rising sea levels, big, serious implications for the lives of our grandchildren, unless something is done soon being within the next 10 to 20 years. What can be done is many things, but what will be done is the real question. It requires leadership. It requires putting a price on carbon in the US, in China, and India. The most rational way to do that is a carbon tax. That's the most economically efficient, very clearly. And that requires the kind of solidarity within a country to say that we will sacrifice a little bit right now for the sake of our grandchildren so they will have a better life. And that requires leadership in order to pull that off. Whether it's feasible, whether populations in these countries and elsewhere in the world will rise to a call to do that is not clear. There's a sense of skepticism and cynicism that is spread in many of these countries, including the democracies, that is very hard to overcome. But frankly, I also blame it on our leaders, that they have not stepped up to take the risks that would identify these problems and make a claim on the national solidarity that may or may not be there to address these problems. And we won't discover whether that solidarity is there or not until someone tries to evoke it by demanding change on the basis of it. And that we haven't seen. You'll find very few experts who think that climate is something that can be separated from the economy, from social relations, from health, from poverty, from migration. All of these things have connections that require that the connections be recognized. It's really important to realize that the cost, economic cost of not addressing the climate challenges will just go up. It'll get more and more expensive and more difficult from an engineering and other point of view to address unless it's addressed sooner. So the connections to the economy are very, very clear. It's going to be relatively cheap to address now, and very, very expensive for our children to address. And so that connection is very, very quite clear there. And then you get to the question of, global health. And as, the populous parts of the world get warmer and warmer, the ability of tropic diseases to move further into those populations increases. That's a serious problem. With regard to things like poverty, one of the saddest things about climate change is that the first victims, those who are most likely to suffer soonest in the largest ways, are some of the poorest parts of the world. That is Bangladesh, for example. It is so low to the sea level that rising seas will immediately affect that population, and that's a population that's struggling to achieve its own development as it is. And we could look to other areas and find similar kinds of impacts. And so climate change will adversely affect the opportunities for the poorer countries to launch their own development, and Bangladesh being the case number one, but there are others. So these things are all connected, and all the experts that I've ever heard recognize the connections amongst them.